Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. I was standing in front of the mirror, struggling with the back zipper of my emerald green evening dress. The fabric was fitted, the neckline modest, but the cut hugged my waist in a way that made me feel confident. Tonight was important. My husband had invited colleagues from his firm to a small charity dinner, and I was determined to look perfect. I had been pulling at the zipper for 5 minutes when I heard a knock on the bedroom door. It was Daniel, our neighbor, and lately, the man my husband had asked to help with small repairs around the house. He'd been over fixing a loose cabinet handle in the kitchen, but when he heard me mutter in frustration, he stepped closer. "You need help?" he asked from the doorway, smiling that easy, unbothered smile that always seemed to linger too long. I hesitated, aware of how this might look, but I turned my back toward him. "Just the zipper," I said, keeping my voice even. He stepped in, his footsteps slow, measured. His hands were warm when they brushed against my bare upper back, fingertips grazing my skin for just a second longer than necessary before catching the zipper tab. The moment felt strangely charged, like the air itself had thickened. The zipper slid upward in a smooth motion, the sound soft and final. But instead of stepping back, his hand lingered, the tips of his fingers resting lightly between my shoulder blades. My breath caught before I could stop it. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid someone else might hear. Though we were alone, I told myself it was just a harmless comment. But then his hand shifted slightly, down, tracing the line of the zipper he had just closed. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't accidental either. I should have moved, said something, but I didn't. I stayed still. There was a part of me, the part that had been tired, unseen and lonely these past few months, that didn't want him to stop. My husband had been distracted for weeks. Caught up in work, his attention always somewhere else. Daniel's attention was here, now. Fully taut, his touch was light, almost tentative, but it was enough to set my pulse racing. His fingers brushed against the small of my back, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "You deserve someone to notice," he murmured. The words landed heavy, a truth I didn't want to admit but couldn't ignore. The sound of a car pulling up in the driveway jolted me back to reality. My husband, Daniel's hand finally left my back, and the space between us felt strangely cold. He stepped away, his expression unreadable, and I turned back to the mirror. My dress was perfect, my hair was perfect, but there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there before, a flicker of awareness, a dangerous acknowledgement of what had just passed between us. We didn't speak of it again that night. My husband came in, kissed my cheek, and complimented my dress, never suspecting that just minutes earlier, someone else's hands had been there. But every time Daniel came over after that, to fix a shelf, change a light bulb, tighten a screw, I caught him looking at me in that same way. And worse, I realized I was looking back. The next time I saw Daniel, it was a Saturday afternoon. My husband had left early for a weekend golf trip with a few friends from the firm. I told myself I was fine with it. I'd catch up on laundry, maybe read, enjoy some quiet, but the quiet was heavier than I expected by late morning. I was outside trimming the roses when I heard the familiar sound of Daniel's truck pulling into his driveway. I didn't look over right away, but I could feel his eyes on me. When I finally did glance his way, he lifted a hand in greeting. "Need any help over there?" He called, a half smile tugging at his mouth. I almost said no, but then I noticed the loose panel on the side of the porch I'd been meaning to fix for weeks. "Actually, maybe," I replied. Within minutes, he was crouched down, screwdriver in hand, the sun catching the side of his face. I tried not to stare, but there was something about the easy way he moved, the quiet confidence in his posture. When he looked up, he caught me watching and held my gaze for just a beat too long. "You don't have to help," I said softly, as if my voice might break the spell between us. "I know," he answered. "I want to." When he stood, he stepped closer than he needed to, brushing past me to grab another tool from his belt. I could smell the faint trace of cedar and soap on him. The contact was light, accidental, if anyone asked, but it sent a flicker of heat through me. We worked side by side for a while, the conversation casual. But every so often, his hand would pass something to me, and his fingers would touch mine just a second too long. When the last panel was secured, I thanked him, meaning more than just for the porch. He gave me that same unreadable look, as if we were both silently acknowledging the tension we'd been tiptoeing around since that evening with the zipper. Later that night, I stood at the kitchen counter pouring a glass of wine when there was a knock on the back door. Daniel. He held a small bag of fresh peaches from his yard. "Thought you might like these," he said. I invited him in. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the air warmer. We talked about nothing important, the weather, the peaches, a neighbor's dog that had been wandering around. But beneath it all was the steady hum of awareness. Every time his eyes met mine, I felt it in my chest. When I reached for a peach, our hands brushed again. I didn't pull away, neither did he. There was a long pause, the kind that feels like standing at the edge of something dangerous. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I knew he could see something in my face, something I wasn't sure I should be showing. Then, as if the moment had stretched too far, he stepped back. "I should go," he said, his voice low, but as he turned, his hand grazed my arm, a fleeting, electric touch that lingered in my skin long after he left. That night, lying in bed alone, I thought about it, about him, about the way I hadn't moved, the way I'd let his fingers stay. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. I was waiting for the next time. The following week, I kept catching myself glancing toward his house. It wasn't intentional, or at least that's what I told myself, but whenever I was outside watering the plants or hanging laundry on the line, my eyes drifted toward his driveway, half expecting to see him. It happened on a Thursday evening. I'd just finished making dinner for one when my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. "Going to be late. Client dinner." "Don't wait up, I set the phone down and stared at the empty place across from me at the table. The silence in the house pressed against me like a thick blanket. After dinner, I took the trash out to the curb. Daniel was there, wheeling his own bin down the driveway. We exchanged a nod, nothing unusual, but there was a hesitation in his step, as if he was debating whether to say something. "You look bored," he said finally, his mouth curling into a half smile. "I am," I admitted with a laugh I hadn't expected to come out. Long night ahead. He tilted his head toward his porch. "I was going to have a drink. You could join me if you don't feel like staring at walls all night." I should have said no. I almost said no, but the thought of going back inside. That silent house felt unbearable. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from him at his small wooden table on the porch. A single lamp threw warm light over us, and the crickets filled the spaces between our words. We talked about everything, except the things sitting between us, about the town, about how he grew up nearby, about my husband's long hours. He listened in a way I wasn't used to, leaning forward slightly whenever I spoke, his eyes never drifting away. When I reached for my glass, my bracelet caught on the edge of my sleeve, tugging the fabric. Before I could fix it, he was already leaning in, gently freeing the material. His fingers brushed my wrist, slow enough that I knew it wasn't an accident. The touch was brief, but it sent a tremor up my arm. I didn't move back. "Thanks," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but his gaze stayed on me a second longer than it should have. We sat there until the air cooled, until the wine was gone, until I realized I was holding my breath every time. His knee brushed mine under the table. When I stood to leave, he followed me down the steps. We stopped near the path that led to my yard. The porch light from my house barely reached us, casting everything in shadow. "You should get some sleep," he said softly. I nodded, but I didn't move right away. And then, maybe because the night was too still, maybe because the pull between us had gone on too long, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered against my cheek, warm and steady. I should have stepped back.
I didn't.
For a moment, we just stood there, the world holding its breath around us. Then he let his hand fall, his expression unreadable. "Good night," he said, turning away before I could answer. I walked back into my house, heart pounding, knowing something had shifted. Over the next few days, I thought about that moment more than I should have. I found myself replaying it while folding laundry, while washing dishes, while lying in bed next to my sleeping husband. It was the way Daniel's hand had felt against my skin. The quiet certainty in his touch, not rushed, not hesitant. And I knew deep down that if I let this continue, we were going to cross a line neither of us could uncross. For the next few days, we kept our distance. Or maybe I just told myself that we did. I'd see him across the driveway when I left for errands, or catch sight of him in his yard when I was standing at the kitchen window. Each time there was this flicker, a second too long, where our eyes met and then darted away, like neither of us wanted to admit we were waiting for a dot by Saturday. My husband was gone again, a conference 2 hours away, back late Sunday night. He kissed me on the cheek before you left, distracted, already thinking about his schedule. The day was quiet, warm, slow. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned, I read, I even baked just to keep my hands moving. But the whole time, my mind kept drifting. Next door dot in the late afternoon, I stepped out to hang fresh sheets on the line. The sun was dipping lower, and a light breeze stirred the air. I was halfway through pinning the last sheet when I heard his voice. "Need a hand?" I turned to see Daniel standing just beyond the fence, holding a small bag of tools. He was in a faded t-shirt, his forearms streaked with dust, hair a little mussed like he'd been working. "I think I've got it," I said, smiling. "Not what I meant," he said, nodding toward the side of my house. "Your porch light, the one by the back door, it's flickering. I've got time if you want me to fix it before it dies completely." The offer was innocent enough. Too innocent, but I nodded. "Sure, thanks." Inside, I let him through. The kitchen toward the back door. The space suddenly felt smaller with him in it, the scent of warm wood and faint aftershave clinging to the air. He set his tools down and reached up to unscrew the old bulb. I stood just behind him, close enough to notice the curve of his shoulders under the fabric of his shirt dot. It should have been a simple fix, a few minutes, nothing more. But when he turned to hand me the old bulb, my bracelet caught on the lace trim of my summer dress. "Hold still," he said, stepping closer. I froze as his fingers worked at the delicate threads. His touch was careful at first, but then his knuckles brushed my skin, and it was like the air changed. The room felt warmer. My breath slowed, my pulse quickened. He didn't pull away right away. Instead, his fingertips lingered against my wrist, almost tracing the faint beat beneath. The skin, I didn't move. I couldn't. When he finally freed the bracelet, he let it drop gently into my palm. But his gaze didn't leave mine. "You're all set," he said quietly. But his voice had shifted, lower, almost rough. I swallowed. "Thanks." He stepped back, but not far. For a second, it felt like we were both leaning towards something dangerous, something neither of us was ready to name. A burst of wind from the open door lifted the hem of my dress slightly, and without thinking, his hand reached to smooth it. Down. Too slow, too intentional. His fingers stayed at my hip a beat longer than they needed to. I should have stepped back. Instead, I let the moment stretch. His eyes searched mine like he was waiting for me to stop him. I didn't, finally. He exhaled, pulling his hand away as if it took effort. "I should go." I nodded, but when he left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, my hand pressed against the spot where his fingers had been, my heart pounding like I'd just done something reckless. The next time we saw each other, there wouldn't be any pretending. The day it happened, there was no plan. There never is for moments like these. It was a Tuesday evening. Rain had started earlier than the forecast promised, light at first, then heavy enough to make the whole neighborhood quiet. My husband had texted to say he'd be staying late. "Don't wait up." I'd been in the living room, a blanket, Over my lap, the sound of rain against the windows filling the air. The doorbell rang, unexpected, almost swallowed by the storm. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing there, damp from the rain, a plastic container in his hands, made too. "Much soup," he said with a faint smile. "Thought you might want some." I stepped aside, letting him in. The scent of him, clean rain, warm fabric, and something faintly woodsy, brushed past me as he moved toward the kitchen. We set the soup down, and while I poured it into a pot to reheat, he leaned against the counter, watching me in that quiet way of his. It wasn't the first time I'd felt it, that pull, like he was memorizing me in small pieces. "You're quiet tonight," I said without looking up, trying not to say something I shouldn't. He replied softly. I froze, the ladle still in my hand. When I turned, his eyes were on mine, steady. Searching. The room seemed smaller again, like the air between us was thick enough to touch. "Daniel," I began, but I didn't finish. He crossed the space between us in 2 slow steps, stopping close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair back from my face. The touch was gentle, reverent, but it carried the weight of all the times we hadn't touched before. "I shouldn't," he murmured, voice rougher now. "I didn't." Moved out his fingertips, lingered against my cheek, and I felt my resolve falter, unravel. The storm outside seemed to fade. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and the low rhythm of his breathing. When he kissed me, it was tentative at first, almost questioning. But then I kissed him back, and it changed. Deepened, warmed, became something that had been building for weeks. The kiss wasn't rushed. It was slow, tasting of longing and restraint finally breaking. His hands slid to my waist, drawing me closer, while mine found the back of his neck. Feeling the faint tremor there, the world narrowed. To the feel of his lips, the press of his body, the steady heat building between us. Every movement was deliberate, like we both wanted to memorize each second so it couldn't be taken back. When we finally parted, we stayed close, foreheads resting together, breaths uneven. "I've wanted this for longer than I should admit," he whispered. "So have I confessed, the truth feeling dangerous on my tongue. We didn't talk about what it meant or where it would lead. That night, we let ourselves exist only in that moment, in the warmth, the closeness, the quiet. Storm of it all, the soup never got eaten. It sat cooling on the stove, forgotten, as we stayed there in the dimly lit kitchen, lips brushing again and again as if neither of us could bear to fully break the contact. Daniel's hand slid from my waist to my lower back, pulling me closer, until my body rested fully against his. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, each small movement sending ripples of awareness through me. I never noticed before how perfectly his height fit with mine, or how this simple touch of his fingers could feel like a promise. Outside, the rain battered harder against the windows, a wild contrast to the slow, deliberate pace we kept. He kissed the edge of my jaw, then the hollow beneath my ear, pausing to breathe me in. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. "I can't," I breathed, my voice trembling in a way I didn't recognize. His lips found mine again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding into my hair, holding me as though letting go wasn't an option. My fingers tangled in the fabric of his shirt, feeling the solid warmth beneath, the subtle shift of muscle when he moved. We didn't rush. Neither of us wanted this to be something quick, something careless. Every touch was unhurried, deliberate. The kind of closeness that felt almost like a conversation in itself. His thumb traced the curve of my cheek. Mine followed the line of his jaw, feeling the faint roughness there. When his forehead rested against mine again, he exhaled slowly. "I've imagined this so many times," he said. "So have I admitted, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. The living room felt warmer than the kitchen, so we drifted there without even deciding to. The lights were low, the sound of the rain filling every quiet space between words. I sank into the couch, and he sat beside me, close enough that our knees touched. He brushed his fingers over mine, slow and searching, then turned my hand in his to press his lips to my palm. The gesture was so tender it made my chest ache. I didn't know how long we sat like that, tangled together in half whispers and long, lingering touches. Sometimes we kissed. Sometimes we just breathed the same air, our eyes locked as though we were both afraid to look away. At one point, I leaned my head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around me, his hand resting lightly against my side. It felt safe. Safe in a way that scared me because I knew it wasn't supposed. Do you think we'll regret this? I asked quietly. Probably, he said. Then, after a pause, but not tonight. That was when I realized I didn't want to think about tomorrow. I didn't want to think about the consequences, the guilt, or the questions. I just wanted this moment, this feeling, this heat between us that felt impossible to ignore. So I let myself lean closer again, and he welcomed me with the same warmth as before. The kisses grew slower but deeper, each one sinking into me like something I wouldn't be able to forget. We stayed like that until the storm outside began to fade, until the clock told us it was far later than it should have been. And when he finally left that night, I could still feel him. In my hair, on my lips, under my skin. It wasn't the end. I think we both knew it. It was the start of something neither of us would be able to undo. We spoke less than usual, but when our eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding between us, a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted permanently. One evening, a week later, I came home to find an envelope on my kitchen counter. No note, just my name written in his handwriting. Inside was the spare key I had given him, along with a single line. If I stay, I'll ruin us both. I stood there for a long time, the key heavy in my palm, the words heavier still. The house felt quieter without him, emptier in a way that went beyond his absence. I knew it was for the best. I knew it would keep my life intact, my marriage untouched, at least on the surface. But as I sat alone that night, the sound of rain returning outside, I realized that I would always carry the memory of him, not just his touch or the warmth of his presence, but the way he made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't in years. We never spoke again. He moved out quietly, and life returned to its familiar rhythm. My husband never asked questions, but sometimes, when the rain falls just right and the world feels small and still, I can almost feel him again. And I wonder, if I had asked him to stay, would we have survived the storm? Or drowned in it?